The Pacific Northwest has long been a hotspot for tales of mysterious creatures lurking in its dense forests. Of these, the legend of Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, stands out as one of the most enduring and mysterious, with sightings and encounters going back thousands of years. While many consider Bigfoot to be nothing more than folklore, others are convinced that this elusive creature is very real. One man's experience in a remote cabin in Washington has recently reignited the debate after he photographed what he believes to be a Bigfoot peering through the window during the night. This man, who has chosen to remain anonymous, claims to have photographed a Bigfoot looking through the window of his cabin in the dead of night. His story and the images he captured have since spread across the internet, reigniting the age-old debate over the existence of this legendary creature. The man commented that he had been feeling the weight of modern life bearing down on him, and so decided to escape to the forests of Washington, a region known for its dense woodlands and serene landscapes. He booked a secluded cabin far from the nearest town, nestled deep within a forest that seemed almost primordial in its stillness and isolation. The quiet was broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of wildlife. But as night fell on the second day of his stay, the peacefulness of his retreat would be shattered by an encounter he would never forget. It was late at night, and the man explained that he was sitting by the fireplace. The windows of the cabin were small, offering only a limited view of the dark forest outside. But as he prepared to head to bed, he decided to look outside the window. He glanced toward the window and froze. There, just beyond the glass, was a face staring back at him. The face was not human. It was larger, covered in dark, matted hair, with deep-set eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The creature stood upright, its massive form towering over the window, its broad shoulders and muscular build barely discernible in the shadows. The man said he was paralyzed with fear and fascination. He had heard stories of Bigfoot before, but like many, he had dismissed them as myths or exaggerations. However, now he was face to face with what could only be the legendary creature itself. The man said that he quickly grabbed his phone, which he had left on a nearby table. He snapped several photographs of the creature, capturing its massive frame and piercing gaze, adding that the creature seemed to be interested in him for a few more moments before slowly backing away from the window and disappearing into the darkness of the forest. The man couldn't believe what had just happened and said that he spent the rest of the night wide awake, replaying the encounter in his mind. The next morning, he reviewed the photographs he had taken, and although some were blurry due to his shaking hands, a few images were clear enough to show the outline of the creature and its imposing size. Convinced that he had captured something extraordinary, he decided to share his experience and upload the photographs to Facebook groups that investigate Bigfoot sightings and encounters, but he was wary of revealing his identity. He said that he knew that claims of Bigfoot sightings were often met with skepticism and ridicule. To avoid unwanted attention, the man uploaded the images to several Facebook groups dedicated to Bigfoot sightings and investigations, using a pseudonym to protect his anonymity. These groups, populated by enthusiasts and researchers, provided a platform where he could share his story and evidence without fear of backlash. He said that the response was very supportive of what he had experienced, with others coming forward and saying that they had encountered similar creatures while in a forest. Within hours, the photos had gone viral within the Bigfoot community. Comments poured in, with some users praising the images as some of the most compelling evidence of Bigfoot they had ever seen. As the photos continued to circulate, the debate over their authenticity intensified. Skeptics pointed to the lack of video footage, the graininess of some of the images, and the absence of other witnesses as reasons to doubt the story. They argued that the creature could easily have been a hoax, staged to create a sensation online. However, many Bigfoot enthusiasts and researchers defended the images, noting the creature's distinct features, its posture, and the location of the sighting as consistent with other credible Bigfoot encounters. The man said that the encounter had been a life-altering experience, and while he understood the skepticism, he knew what he had seen and believed that the photographs were genuine. He chose not to engage in the online debates, preferring instead to let the images speak for themselves. The encounter had left him with a profound sense of awe and a renewed respect for the mysteries of the natural world. These photographs have since become a topic of intense interest within the Bigfoot community and beyond. The images, whether they depict a real Bigfoot or not, have reignited public curiosity about the legendary creature. For some, the photos are a tantalizing glimpse of proof that Bigfoot exists, while for others, they are just another chapter in the long history of Bigfoot sightings and hoaxes. Interestingly, as many Bigfoot researchers have pointed out, the legend of Bigfoot in Washington dates back long before European settlers arrived. Native American tribes in the Pacific Northwest, such as the Salish, Yakima, and Lummi, have passed down stories of a large, hairy, human-like creature that lived in the forested mountains. Known by various names, including Sasquatch, these creatures were often described as benevolent yet powerful beings, respected and feared by the tribes. The legends told of these beings as guardians of the forest, sometimes interacting with humans, but mostly keeping their distance. The first modern reports of Bigfoot sightings in Washington began in the 19th century, as settlers moved into the region. One of the earliest recorded sightings occurred in 1884, when a group of settlers near the Cascade Mountains claimed to have seen a large, ape-like creature. Descriptions of the creature were consistent with what we now recognize as Bigfoot: tall, covered in hair, and walking upright on two legs. Throughout the 20th century, reports of Bigfoot sightings in Washington continued to surface, with many accounts coming from the remote areas of the state, particularly around the Olympic Peninsula, Mount St. Helens, and the Cascade Range. These sightings often describe the creature as being between 6 and 10 feet tall, with dark fur, large feet, and a distinct, powerful odor. Eyewitnesses frequently reported seeing the creature at a distance, often during twilight or nighttime, when visibility was poor. One of the most famous Bigfoot encounters in Washington occurred in 1969 near the town of Colville, in the northeastern part of the state. A group of loggers reported a series of strange occurrences, including sightings of a large, hairy creature and the discovery of enormous footprints in the mud around their logging camp. The loggers, who were experienced outdoorsmen, were convinced that they had encountered something extraordinary. Their reports drew the attention of Bigfoot researchers and enthusiasts, sparking renewed interest in the creature. Another notable incident took place in 1971 at Mount St. Helens, where a group of campers reported seeing a creature that fit the description of Bigfoot. The campers described the creature as being about 7 feet tall, covered in dark hair, and walking upright. They claimed that the creature approached their campsite, sniffed around, and then disappeared into the woods. The incident was widely reported in the local media, adding to the growing body of Bigfoot sightings in Washington. In recent years, sightings of Bigfoot in Washington have continued to be reported. In 2000, a motorist driving along Highway 20 near the town of Winthrop claimed to have seen a large, dark figure standing by the side of the road. The driver described the figure as being around 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms. The sighting was investigated by Bigfoot researchers who found large footprints in the area, further fueling speculation that the creature might be real. Throughout the early 1900s, a series of unexplainable sightings of hairy humanoid creatures were reported all across the state of New York. These encounters would range from supposed attacks by possible shipwrecked sailors of giant proportions who had been turned into wild men after years of isolation, to man-beasts covered from head to toe in an unexplainable fur that devoured local livestock. In the spring of 1899, and lasting until about early 1901, the small village of Johnsonburg, located in Wyoming County, western New York, was stirred by a series of unexplained events. A wild creature, resembling a gorilla, was claimed to be spotted by a group of local residents in the surrounding woods of April and May of 1899. Although the first sightings were met with disbelief and shrugged off as mere imagination, as more and more locals came forward with similar accounts, the village as well as local law enforcement began to take the claims far more seriously. The creature was described by the eyewitnesses as towering at a height nearly a foot taller than any man and covered in a thick black fur with elongated disproportionate arms that hung down to its knees. Its eyes were believed to be deep-set and dark red. Additionally, witnesses would claim that the creature's roar could be heard from several miles away, usually as sharp calls and deep shrieking in the night. When confronted with the series of strange reports, local law enforcement speculated that the creature had most likely escaped from a nearby traveling circus or a zoo, but there were no reports of missing gorillas from any of the nearby cities. Unfortunately for the village, the creature did not appear to be content with remaining hidden in the woods. According to the reports, the unknown gorilla-like creature began to make forays into the village itself, raiding chicken coops and sheep pens, leaving behind a costly trail of destruction. In response to these large livestock losses, the villagers organized hunting parties to track down the creature, but their efforts were in vain. The creature seemed to have an uncanny ability to evade capture. One of the most unnerving encounters with the creature was witnessed by a group of women who claimed to have been approached by the creature while they were strolling through the woods. According to the women, the creature suddenly appeared before them, snarling and baring its teeth at them. The women froze, unsure of what to do, when suddenly the creature sprang into action. It ran swiftly up a huge tree and disappeared out of sight as if vanishing into thin air. The women were left shaken but unharmed, and they quickly spread the word of their encounter. Despite the villagers' best efforts, the creature remained at large. It seemed to disappear as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only a trail of destruction and a community on edge. Theories about the creature's true identity were debated for years to come, with some insisting that it was indeed an escaped gorilla, while others believed it to be a new species altogether. The legend of the Johnsonburg gorilla, as it came to be known, continued to haunt the community for decades. Some locals claimed to have seen the creature in the years following the initial sightings, but these reports were never substantiated. To this day, the mystery of the Johnsonburg gorilla remains unsolved. The Wakefield Sasquatch sighting. During the sweltering summer of 1906, the Bronx borough of New York City was gripped by a wave of terror after a series of sightings of a strange monster were reported by people of high standing within the community. Rumors of a wild man, covered in thick hair and with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark, were reported to city officials and local law enforcement, causing panic for the residents of the area. At around the time of the Bronx sightings, the small town of Wakefield also experienced similar stories of strange encounters, where sightings of the creature seemed to be concentrated around the town less than 20 minutes away. Residents of Wakefield spread rumors about the creature's ferocious appearance, describing it as a lean, mean, and terrifyingly hairy humanoid creature. Whether or not the stories themselves were true, the mere thought of the creature lurking in the shadows was enough to send shivers down their spines, and many were too afraid to venture out after dark during those days back in 1906, causing a form of mass hysteria and panic among the citizens of Wakefield. As the days wore on, more and more people from the Bronx and Wakefield claimed to have seen the wild man, with reports pouring in from across the borough and the small town, sometimes on the same days. Some claimed to have seen the massive ape-like creature prowling through the streets, while others swore they heard its eerie howl echoing through the night in an almost inhuman shriek. Panic spread like wildfire, with rumors and stories flying faster than anyone could keep up with, forcing the authorities to take a more proactive approach about the series of unexplainable reports and witness events. Despite the mounting fear, the authorities were initially skeptical of the wild man reports. They dismissed the sightings as mere hysteria, insisting that there was no such creature in the city. But as the reports continued to pour in, they began to take the situation more seriously, and a massive manhunt was launched to capture the wild man. Armed with nets and tranquilizer darts, the hunters combed the streets and alleys of Wakefield, determined to find the creature, or to at least help calm the nerves of the residents that no creature dwelling near their small town. For days they searched high and low, but the wild man remained elusive, slipping through their grasp time and time again. As the manhunt continued, the people of Wakefield grew increasingly anxious. Schools and shops closed early, and residents locked their doors and windows tight. The majority of citizens refused to venture out after dark, afraid that the wild man might be lurking around every corner. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the wild man's scare came to an end. With no sign of the creature, the authorities called off the manhunt, and life in Wakefield slowly returned to normal. But the legend of the wild man lingered on, a reminder of a time when anything seemed possible, and the line between reality and fantasy was blurred. One of the first recorded sightings of these mysterious creatures in New York date back to the early 1900s, when settlers, farmers, and loggers working in the dense forests and mountains of the state began reporting encounters with strange, hairy beings. These creatures were typically described as standing between 6 and 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur, and walking upright on 2 legs like a human. The beings were said to possess a powerful build, with broad shoulders and long arms, and their faces, though somewhat human-like, had pronounced, animalistic features, including large eyes and a flat nose. One of the earliest and most well-documented sightings occurred in 1902 near the small town of Tannersville, located in the heart of the Catskill Mountains. A group of loggers reported seeing a large, hairy creature watching them from a ridge above their camp. The men described the creature as standing motionless, almost as if it were observing them, before disappearing into the dense forest. The loggers, seasoned outdoorsmen who were familiar with the wildlife of the region, were adamant that what they saw was not a bear or any other known animal. Similar reports soon began to surface from other parts of New York, particularly in the Adirondack Mountains and the remote wilderness areas of the state. In 1908, a farmer in the Hudson Valley claimed to have encountered a hairy humanoid near his barn late at night. The creature, which he described as a giant covered in fur, fled into the woods when he approached. The farmer found large human-like footprints in the mud the next morning, adding credibility to his story. As reports of these sightings spread, they captured the attention of both the local population and the broader public. Newspapers began to publish sensational stories about the hairy wild men of New York, and curiosity seekers flocked to the areas where the sightings had occurred, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious creatures. The sightings also attracted the interest of early cryptozoologists and naturalists who sought to explain the phenomena. Several theories emerged to account for the sightings. Some suggested that the creatures might be escaped circus animals or feral humans living in the wilderness, possibly descendants of hermits or outcasts who had withdrawn from society. Others speculated that the beings could be a previously undiscovered species of ape or a surviving relic of a prehistoric human ancestor, such as a Neanderthal, that had somehow managed to evade detection in the remote forests of New York. The idea that the sightings could be related to indigenous folklore also gained traction. The Iroquois and other Native American tribes of the region had long told stories of large, hairy beings that lived in the forests and mountains. Known by various names, including the giants, these creatures were often described as powerful, fearsome beings that could move through the wilderness undetected. Some researchers suggested that the sightings in the early 1900s might be a continuation of these ancient legends passed down through generations. As sightings continued, some witnesses claimed to have found physical evidence of the creature's presence. The most common form of evidence was large, human-like footprints, often found in muddy or snowy areas near where the creatures had been sighted. These footprints, typically measuring 15 to 18 inches in length, were much larger than those of a human and displayed a distinct 5-toed pattern. In one notable case from 1910, a group of hikers in the Adirondacks discovered a series of large footprints leading into a cave. Inside the cave, they found remnants of a makeshift shelter and what appeared to be bones of small animals, suggesting that something, possibly the creature, had been living there. However, no further evidence was found, and the cave was eventually sealed off by authorities, further adding to the mystery. While these physical traces provided tantalizing clues, they also fueled skepticism. Critics argued that the footprints could have been fabricated or misidentified, and some suggested that the sightings themselves might be the result of hoaxes or overactive imaginations. Despite this, the reports continued to come in, and the legend of the hairy humanoid creatures of New York grew. The sightings of hairy humanoid creatures in early 1900s, New York left a lasting impact on the region's folklore and cultural identity. The stories of these mysterious beings became intertwined with the history and mythology of the state, passed down through generations and retold in books, articles, and documentaries. The creatures, often referred to as Bigfoot or Sasquatch in later years, became symbols of the wild, untamed nature of New York's wilderness, mysterious figures that embodied the fear and fascination that humans have always had with the unknown. In the decades that followed, the sightings and stories of these creatures continued to influence popular culture, inspiring countless works of fiction, films, and television shows. The idea of a hidden, elusive creature lurking in the forests became a staple of American mythology, and New York's role in this narrative only added to the state's mystique. As of right now, the mysterious sightings of hairy humanoid creatures in early 1900s New York remain an unsolved puzzle. Despite numerous reports, physical evidence, and widespread interest, the true nature of these beings has never been definitively determined. Whether they were real creatures, misidentified animals, or products of folklore and imagination, the legend of these hairy humanoids has endured for over a century, continuing to intrigue and captivate those who hear their stories. Located on the border of the state of Florida and Georgia is a 438,000-acre swampland that stretches across the state borders and houses a wide variety of undiscovered animal and insect species. This peat-filled wetland, referred to as the Okefenokee Swamp, has been at the center of several encounters with the skunk ape creature and is often believed to be the last unexplored refuge of the creatures in the modern day. Even more interesting, the name Okefenokee is a native Creek Indian word that roughly translates to mean the land of the trembling earth and seems to reference a massive creature that's known for shaking the earth as it walks. The oldest known skunk ape encounter to have occurred within the Okefenokee Swamp was reported back during the winter of 1828. According to the report made by 2 eyewitnesses, both of which were amateur hunters who were looking to explore the surrounding area, the 2 men came across what they referred to as a giant. Originally, their expedition began as a short hunting party, but rather than turn back at the height of their excitement, the 2 men's trip continued for another several weeks as they traveled deeper into the swamp, recording brief encounters with bears, panthers, alligators, and overgrown snakes. Roughly 3 weeks into their hunting trip, the men claimed to have heard the sound of loud screaming. However, the screams sounded much deeper and louder than a man could naturally produce. As they glanced around the woods surrounding their camp to investigate the source of the noise, the men then heard what they described as the sound of heavy stomping, as if a large creature was running through the woods surrounding their camp. Unsure of whether or not the creature was a large wild animal or a distressed man, the 2 hunters decided to light a fire and stay within the proximity of their makeshift camp until daylight, as the day was soon ending and darkness was fast approaching. Despite the roaring fire to help keep the nearby woods illuminated, the men complained that they were unable to sleep due to the strange sounds they continued to hear, despite no creature being visible anywhere near their location. Additionally, it became necessary to gather nearby scraps of wood to keep the fire burning, and so the men were forced to venture slightly more and more into the surrounding darkness to maintain their light source. By the next morning, the men investigated the nearby woods and wetlands, hoping to find any evidence of a creature having prowled their camp the night prior. After a few hours of looking, the men claimed that they came across several barefoot, human-looking footprints that would have been impossible for any normal person to have made. Mostly due to the fact that the footprints were all spaced roughly 6 feet apart and were an estimated 18 inches in length. Worried that the creature might return, the hunters immediately fled the swamp and returned to town. Oddly enough, the story of the encounter with the unknown swamp giant does not end there. Once the 2 hunters returned to the closest town, they told the nearby townspeople of what they had encountered and warned them that a monster might soon attack the town. Fearful of the beast, the town gathered together a hunting party of 9 men to hunt down the beast and kill it before it could attack the town. Gathered together, the men went into the swamp and traveled as far down as its southernmost part, now located in the state of Florida. After several days of searching the area, the men located sets of footprints far too large for any normal man to have created and used the footprints as a trail guiding them directly to the giant. As the men began following the footprints, they noticed that they were often spaced increasingly further apart, sometimes disappearing completely and reappearing elsewhere in the swamps, as if the creature climbed and jumped between trees for traveling. Before long, the trail was completely lost, and the 9 men decided to make camp for the night and begin their search again at daybreak. Unfortunately for the band of men, during the night, the creature would invade the camp and attack the hunters in a fit of rage. According to the 9 witnesses, a massive humanoid creature covered in hair all over its body suddenly ran straight through the camp, toppling over several tents, and began tearing apart the equipment and supplies of the traveling men. Fearing for their lives, the men grabbed their guns and fired at the creature, causing the giant to retaliate by overpowering the men and ripping the heads off of 5 members of the party, tossing their limp bodies several feet as if they weighed next to nothing. The remaining 4 members continued firing at the creature, sending several rounds of bullets through its chest, before the creature fell down in a low grumble and passed away shortly after. After closer examination of the giant's body, the men estimated the humanoid creature to have been slightly over 13 feet in height and appeared to look exactly like a man with the exception of its tremendous size and full body covering of hair. While observing the body, however, the men continued to hear the sound of screaming in the surrounding woods, similar to what the 2 hunters had experienced on their journey several days prior. Believing that the screaming could be coming from a dozen more of the giant creatures, the men packed up their equipment and began moving out of the swamp during the night, unable to wait until morning out of fear that a retaliatory attack would take place if they continued to stay. Once the 4 men returned to the nearest town, they told the townspeople what happened to the 5 other men who were attacked, and that they estimated that a dozen more of the giant creatures were still out there in the nearby swamps. Fearing that an attack would eventually reach the town, the men began traveling throughout the area and warning people of an impending attack from giants. On the 1st of January 1829, a local reporter that wrote for the Georgia newspaper Statesman would interview the men and retell their story for local publishing. By February of that year, less than 30 days after the original publication, reprintings of the story spread to neighboring communities and would see a February issue published in the Connecticut newspaper The Sentinel, warning traveling parties to stay clear of the Okefenokee swamp. Although continued sightings would be made of the giant humanoid creatures in the surrounding areas, later referred to as skunk apes, no violent attack was made over the following years. After a few decades, the sensationalism of the story eventually died down and became nothing more than a local legend. To this day, travelers are still warned of the Okefenokee swamp giants when traveling through the region.